Chronicles TV on air. We are now live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. In the previous episode, we began part 2 of the investigation. Right now, we're gonna go check out some other places to investigate. And for today's episode, make sure that like button supports completion of the channel. Let's go check out the bed, the hospital room. See if he's there. This is the ward where Mr. Vigil was brought, apparently. To be frank, I'm a little worried about seeing him again. The lawyer. Hello again. Are you feeling better now, Mr. Vigil? Yes, thank you. Somewhat better. I'm so sorry to have caused you to... it was because of me. If I had to expose your secret and force you to remember the things you obviously try to forget. The prosecutor was here until a few moments ago too. You just missed him. Oh, Cosmo beat us to it? He said much the same as you. He was very apologetic. But the truth is, I brought all this upon myself. Please, don't think like that. Keeping it from Evie, my wife, all these years, I've carried such a sense of guilt. But that's not the worst of it. Over time, I obviously came to deceive myself as well. You mean about your dismissal? Looking back now, I'm beginning to think that perhaps Inspector Gregson didn't stumble across me by accident at all. He compensated me so generously for acting as a stand-in. He was clearly concerned for my well-being and doing what he could to help. So perhaps Gregson knew exactly what he had to become of Mr. Vigil all along then. I'm sure this is just desserts for 10 years of lies and deception, but... It wasn't me that helped the professor escape 10 years ago. It wasn't me! I swear it's true! Oh, Mr. Vigil. I'm sure you'd rather not dredge up upon even more than your past at this time, but... If possible, could you tell us exactly what really happened? I want to. I need to get all this out of my chest. I just want someone to tell me what I should have done. Converse. Thank you. Inspector Gregson was obviously engaged in a special operation of some sort. He was investigating something that even Scotland Yard couldn't know about. Details of the Reaper marks? Yes. It was when he had to carry out those investigations that I would take his identification and impersonate him. You pretend to be the inspector and carry out an investigation on his behalf? Oh no, never! Our common street peddler couldn't possibly carry out a proper police investigation. All I would do is go to the specified location and make a little hoo-ha. Hoo-ha! Just something to leave an impression, so everyone there would think a detective called Gregson was here. So, that's what you were doing on the day prior to the incident? Yes, he asked me to make an appearance at the park in Lashun for the Red-Headed League event. So as usual, I flashed the inspector's identification around and was very local about my presence. But then you were taken prisoner by those red-headed fraudsters. Yes. So you would always make a point of showing Gregson's identification generally being loud? That's what the inspector asked me to do, yes. Well, that's one way of becoming a legendary detective, I suppose. Not a good one, though. And as you know, I suffered this bruising around my neck at their hands. But the following day, they kept their word and released me, without returning the inspector's identification to you. However, we had it arranged to meet in Fresno Street in the room at 5 days that day so I could report back to the inspector. But at the agreed time, that's when I heard the gunshot. It was a midnight on 17 June 10 years ago. That was when the time scheduled for... Wait, what? What were we talking about? Oh, I thought we were talking about him escaping from the Redheaded League. Okay. But the Professor execution never actually took place, did it? Or rather, the execution itself must have been used to effect the planet escape. Hardly dare to imagine what a chilling planet was. Barclay was renowned for being the highest security prison in the country. Everything that went in the went in and out of the place was searched multiple times. But there was one notable exception, or rather, one notable loophole, something that was never questioned. I have a feeling I know what that loophole was now. The coffins into which the bodies of the executed convicts were placed, correct? Yes. Once the coroner had confirmed the death of a condemned convict, the body was taken in the coffin for immediate burial in Lowgate Cemetery just behind the prison. The chief warder first had to sign the necessary papers. And after that, no member of staff was permitted to touch the coffin containing the body again. When execution took place, only the executioner and the coroner were permitted inside the chamber. I would wait in the adjacent room for word that the condemned convict was dead. On that occasion, once I had the confirmation, I went into the mortuary to find a lone coffin as usual. The procedure was that I would sign the paperwork having checked the coffin and then nail it shut. But for some reason that day, the coffin was already nailed shut. No. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed my deputy must have checked the coffin and nailed it shut before I arrived. So you mean the coffin contained... Yes, I can only imagine that Asogi, having escaped his execution somehow, was alive inside the coffin. The coffin was then taken out through the main gates and deposited in Lowgate Cemetery. Presumably there wouldn't have been enough air inside to breathe for long. So in the early hours following the burial, somebody dug up the coffin again to set Genshin free. But in the end, he was fatally shot in the graveyard anyway. What on earth really happened in Lowgate Cemetery that night, I wonder? I'm afraid I really don't know. All I can say with certainty are two things. Asogi couldn't possibly have escaped away without him from somebody working in the prison. And that somebody was not me. Obviously you knew the man then. The professor, I mean? Genshin Asogi? Yes, I remember him well, in fact. Would you mind telling us what you know? Well, having been condemned to death as he was, any contact I had with the man was short, obviously. After that trial, which was carried out behind closed doors, attended only by elite members of the judiciary, they called for his execution to be carried out on the earliest possible opportunity. The outcome of the trial was set from the beginning, wasn't it? It was a time of delicate diplomacy when Britain and Japan were in the process of signing an important treaty. That meant that this potentially establishing case had to be dealt with swiftly and discreetly. The man had less than a week in total. As I was the chief warder, I oversaw his short stay in the cells until it was something. I remember being struck deeply by his noble character and incredible resilience. What do you mean exactly? He was a killer of many men, but he was always quiet and polite. He was a gentleman and a man of intellect. In fact, I couldn't bring myself to believe what he'd done, so I asked him one day, "Yo! Those 5 members of the aristocracy whose lives were taken, were you really responsible?" "I'm guilty of the unforgivable crime of ending another human's life, yes." The following day, the closed trial took place, and the verdict was no surprise. Guilty. That night, when he was brought back to his cell, I saw something unusual. Something unusual? What? The last will and testament of Genshin Asogi. The last will. As I said, it was on the night of the following his trial, after he found guilty. I was doing the rounds of the cells, and when I looked into Asogi's, I noticed that he seemed to have a sheet of paper in his hand. His last will and testament then, presumably? As soon as he noticed me, he hurriedly shoved it behind his back. But why did you find that so unusual? Isn't it normal for men to pen a will when he knows his death is nigh? Yes, that's true. But there were special conditions to Asaki's incarceration, you see. What set of conditions? Well, even though he was held in a cell designed for condemned inmates, he was allowed to keep his personal effects with him, with one exception. Really? He was allowed his things? That is unusual, certainly. Of course, he'd been convicted of killing 5 members of the aristocracy, but at the same time, he was a guest in our country from the Empire of Japan. The powers that be were determined that his final days shouldn't be needlessly uncomfortable. And what was the exception you mentioned to the personal effects he was allowed? That's the point. He wasn't permitted to have writing materials, specifically no pens or paper. So, he was prevented from leaving any written record of what happened to him? Yes, that was the long and the short of it. I have no idea where he obtained that paper. Any writing materials would have been confiscated from him upon his incarceration. As I said, he hid the paper behind his back and then he pleaded with me. What did you just hide behind your back? Please turn a blind eye. This is my lifeline. But you know it's against the rules. You're the only person who's seen. If you just agree to keep quiet. Alright then, but what's on that paper? A last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. How can a will be a weapon? So I decided to pretend I see nothing, and I let him keep his will. But then later, it just seemed to vanish without trace. What? What do you mean, it vanished? It would seem that isn't the end of the story, is of the mysterious will. I was the only person who saw Asogi's will, but somehow it disappeared? It was after Asogi's execution. Which was actually an elaborate jailbreak? The warriors gathered up Asogi's possessions that were in his cell. They were all to be sent back to his family home in Japan, you see. To poor Kazuma. And you're saying that it wasn't anywhere to be found among his personal effects? The will, I mean? That's right. Though I didn't search through them myself. But Governor Caden was livid. He was screaming, "It cannot have disappeared completely." That doesn't quite make sense though, does it? In what way? Well, we understood that only Mr. Vigil was aware of the will's existence. In which case, how did the prison governor know how to look for it? Yes, you're right. I really don't know how he knew, but it certainly seemed as though he knew of the will's existence from the outset. Only he didn't refer to it as the will. What he said was, the Asogi Papers. The Asogi Papers? I really can't tell you anything on the subsequent events. Because, well, of what happened. Your dismissal, and the way you blocked it out from your memory. I forgot all this until today. I don't suppose it's relevant to the case, though. Well, anyway, thank you very much for sharing with us, Mr. Vigil. We're very grateful. I'm afraid there's really little more I can tell you. My wife Evie will be here shortly, so I do hope I don't appear rude, but... No, not at all. Thank you again. But what will become of you now? Well, impersonating a police officer is a criminal offense. Of course. I imagine that once I'm fully recovered, I shall be arrested. I'm so sorry. Don't be, please. This was all my doing. I always knew that this day would come. Well, I wish you well. Goodbye, Mr. Vigil. What? Before you go, there's just one thing. Oh, yes? What is it? The Asogi papers. I'm very grateful if you make no mention of the things I told you about them. Presumably for some good reason? It's my understanding that their very existence is a closely guarded secret. If I became known that I remembered, well, it could be rather troublesome, I think. I understand. Some sort of will that Asogi penned just before his death, which the man himself claimed was his last weapon. I wonder, perhaps it had something to do with his plan to escape? If there's anyone who might know more about a document that Cosmo's father left behind, it would be Mr. Vigil's governor. Then we know precisely where we must go. Back to Barclay Prison. And he's just there chilling. Back to the prison we go!
Oh, back again, are you?
Yes. Hello.
I've heard all about your investigation. I read the report just now. You found him, eh? Vigil?
Yes, luckily.
Well, anywho, the laddie doesn't work here no more, so your case is not to do with Barclay. I wouldn't like you to get the wrong idea about that.
Of course, yes. Mr. Vigil stopped working here 10 years ago now, so... Yes, we've seen his dismissal notice, haven't we? He was given the chop?
Alright, Kimmer, you've kin very well. So how about we handcuff Biscuit?
Oh, they really are like little handcuffs. As hard as irons, too.
So, what's brought you doing here today?
Well, there's something else we'd like to ask you about, actually.
Is that so?
We believe there might have been a document that disappeared from Genshin Asogi's cell. I think it's been called the Asogi Papers or something?
Did I say? Gregson's death is not to do with things that might have happened to Barclay. Leave the past in the past, laddie. Let no further about with the relevant details.
His expression changed completely. We're clearly onto something here. Converse!
That murderer's botched execution and the whole miserable escape. They were Barclay's darkest hour, eh? A shocking embarrassment.
Because the convict had a collaborator on the prison staff, you mean?
Aye, for shame. The coroner who confirmed the death of the man after his execution at Courtney Scythe, and my chief warden at the time, Vigil, who was in charge of this whole affair.
But Mr. Vigil says he didn't know anything about it.
The rascal who wouldn't say otherwise, eh? More handcuffs.
Oh, how can I say no? You can never have too much iron in your diet. When Mr. Vigil had handed his dismissal notice as a result of what happened, he was so despairing he jumped out of your office window, didn't he?
I didn't like to say, but that's just Vigil trying to get out of it. Do you not think he wouldn't have jumped from the shock of his crimes being exposed? I do.
You wouldn't say otherwise, though, would you?
Of course, I couldn't shun all the responsibility myself. I should have let him deceive me. Actually, there's barely anybody that went on the know at the time. We Gregson have been murdered and Dr. Sai forbidden from having any visitors.
No visitors? Someone obviously doesn't want her to giving anything away.
Well, we're not going home empty-handed.
And I wouldn't dream of sending you the packing with it now, Kimmer. Here, take a handcuff or two.
Oh, well, it would be rude to say no. Wouldn't want it to be
anorexic.
Oh, blood. It's blood. That's what the iron is.
I suppose if there's anybody who might still can boot what happened back then, it'd be the last from the forensic division, Maria Gori.
Maria Gory?
Aye, Sid's daughter. She didn't have no more, just the one. But the wee Baron followed in her mom's footsteps. She didn't ever see her without a scalpel in her hand.
Oh. The one that was wearing the mask. Dr. Side's daughter, Maria Gory. We could do a talking with her. Why is she called Maria Gory? Wouldn't she be called Maria Scythe instead? So, she's Dr. Side's daughter, but her surname is Gory? My thoughts exactly.
Aye, there's some family history, I'm sure, but didn't account to an in and outs out of it. She grew up watching her mom working with the bodies of the folk who died in the strange circumstance, and decided to do the same with her own life. I can understand myself.
Perhaps she was driven by a deep respect for her mother?
Perhaps. Anywho, she was in charge of Gregson's autopsy, I believe.
Right, and the coroner responsible for this incomplete report.
Someone told me once that the wee lassie always loved her mom's stories about cutting up bodies. There's even rumored that she used to listen to the funeral march as a lullaby.
Well then, perhaps her mother might have told her about the autopsy from the case 10 years ago.
Hey, I did say there's a fighting chance at least. After all, that was a life-changing case for all of us.
We really need to speak to Miss Gory herself about this, I think. Well, thank you very much.
I'm no happy about any part of this. It took years for Londoners to finally get the whole professor business. Can you not give up on this, laddie? Stop asking pointless questions.
I'm sorry. I don't like dredging up these painful memories for everyone.
Can you not just stay away? No? Leave me alone and don't come back, eh? How do you come to ken about that, laddie? There's no many folk even here in the prison who've heard of those papers.
Ah, well, I can't tell. Mr. Vigil told me.
I'm afraid our sources must remain confidential, sir.
We've been led to believe the papers are actually a last will and testament. Is that right? The professor's, or rather, Gechina Sogi's?
Aye, that's right. You're well informed, Jimmy.
Oh, is that the end of the silent treatment? But then after the convict's execution, it mysteriously vanished from his cell, didn't it?
Havers, no, you're half a cock there. I think you didn't quite get your facts straight. It was there in the cell, exactly where it should have been.
Oh, not what we heard elsewhere.
Let me just have a wee hook around in here. I'm sure I could find it. Ah, here you are. See?
The last will and testament of Gechina Sogi, written with a calligraphy brush.
Of course, I can't read a word of Japanese squiggles. By might it says he leaves all his worldly possessions to his son back in homeland.
Yes, that's correct. That's the gist of it.
So these are the Asogi papers.
Aye, of course they are. Papers written by Asogi, nae doubt about it. There's no mystery here, laddie. There's your lot. After all the straw mash of the slasher of the execution, we sent the man's possessions back to his clan in Japan, and that was the end of it.
I think we ought to make a record of this, Mr. Naruhodo, just in case.
One thing before you go on your way, Mr. Naruhodo.
Oh, yes?
Those papers are not to do with Gregson's death. I prefer if you didn't make no mention of them outside the office. Or rather, I wouldn't just prefer it. Consider it an order for the highest level of government.
I understand. What do we got? I, Genshin Asogi, hereby request that upon my death, and any of all material possessions and wealth belonging to me in London be delivered to my son, Kazuma Asogi, in the Empire of Japan. It is with deep sadness I accept my fate in this foreign land, in the knowledge that I will never see my homeland or my family again, but I regret nothing about my chosen path. Alright then. With that, we'll end the episode right here, ladies and gentlemen. Like, comment, subscribe. Chronicles XCB, and I'm signing out.